3 years. That is how long it took for the rot to reach the base of every single post I'd cemented into the ground with my own hands. And I remember the exact moment I stopped seeing a fence and started seeing what it actually was. I was standing in my garden in October, coffee going cold, staring at panels I'd already replaced once, watching them bow and darken in exactly the same pattern as the originals, the same warping, the same green-black creep climbing up from the soil line, and something clicked that should have clicked that day. The day I handed over $400 at the timber yard. I hadn't purchased a boundary, I had purchased a subscription to failure, a product engineered by an industry that needs you back every few years, with your wallet open and your weekend gone. And here is what made my stomach turn. I did everything right. I domed the concrete so water would drain away from the posts. I used pressure, treated lumber, I painted, I sealed. I propped the weakest sections with stakes. Like a field hospital for wood, none of it mattered. Because the physics of dead timber buried in living soil only moves one direction. And that direction is decomposition. The system doesn't care how careful you are. The system isn't broken. It is performing exactly as designed to extract your money on a repeating cycle while you blame yourself for not maintaining it well enough. Look at your own boundary right now. If it is timber, it is already dying. If it is vinyl, it is already brittling in the UV. If it is chain link, it is already rusting at every joint. Every single one of those options came from a supply chain that starts with petroleum or logging and ends with a skip hire company hauling the corpse of your fence to the landfill so you can buy the next one. You aren't a homeowner maintaining a property. You're a customer locked into a product life cycle. Someone else designed it for their profit. Your great grandparents never lived like this. Frontier homesteaders fenced hundreds of acres without a single trip to a hardware store. British farmers still harvest from Hawthorn hedgerows planted before the first European ship touched American soil. Those boundaries are still standing, still thickening, still producing food and shelter and windbreak and wildlife corridor centuries after the hands that planted them turned to dust. That knowledge didn't vanish because it stopped working. It vanished because it stopped generating revenue for someone else. A fence that grows itself from cuttings, that gets stronger every year, instead of weaker, that produces fruit and timber and medicine while it protects your land. That fence is a product you never buy twice, and an industry built on repeat purchases cannot survive a customer who only buys once. So I ripped out every rotting panel. I spent one season planting a mixed living hedge from cuttings that cost me nothing. And by the second autumn, what I had was thicker and taller, more storm-resistant than anything I had built with screws and brackets. It doesn't rot. It doesn't blow over. It sequesters carbon, feeds pollinators, filters wind, and improves the soil it grows in. And it will still be standing long after every wooden fence on my street has been replaced twice, over and forgotten. What changed wasn't my skill. What changed was that I stopped participating in a system that was designed to keep me spending, and I started participating in a biological process designed to keep me fed and protected for free. And the difference between those two systems is the difference between a life spent maintaining someone else's product and a life spent harvesting from your own permanent infrastructure. And here is what nobody in the garden center will explain to you. Every single one of those replacement panels, every bag of quick-set concrete, every pressure-treated post I sank into the ground existed inside a system that was designed to keep me purchasing. But the lie runs deeper than timber. It runs straight into the soil itself. Because the same week I was replacing fence panels, I was also dumping synthetic fertilizer around the base of a hedge that I had planted the year before. A hedge that was yellowing. A hedge that should have been thriving in perfectly good ground, but instead looked like it was starving. And I did what every homeowner does. I bought more product. I bought granular feed. I bought liquid feed. Bought bags labeled premium nutrient enriched planting mix. And the hedge got worse, not immediately, slowly. The way a patient on the wrong medication declines so gradually that you keep increasing the dose instead of questioning the prescription. What I didn't understand then is that every application of Synthetic nitrogen was napalming the fungal network in my soil, mycorrhizal. Fungi, the actual feeding infrastructure that connects plant roots to mineral resources across meters of ground, cannot survive repeated chemical fertilization. They die back, and when they die back, the plant loses access to phosphorus and trace minerals, to water held in fungal hyphae, far beyond the reach of its own roots. So the plant yellows, so you fertilize again, and the cycle tightens. You've now created a patient that cannot survive without the drug that is killing it. This isn't an accident. This is the business model. The garden industry sells you plants grown in sterile potting mix, stripped of every fungal association they would naturally form in living ground. You bring them home, you plant them in soil that you've already tilled into dead powder, destroying the very structure that fungi need to colonize roots. You spray herbicide around the base to keep it tidy, and that herbicide is a broad spectrum antibiotic to soil biology. Then you wonder why your privet looks thin. After 2 years, why your Leyland cypress browns from the inside out, why your thuja needs feeding every spring, when the catalog promised it would tolerate anything. The Romans planted privet hedges that still exist 2,000 years. Without a single bag of fertilizer, frontier farmers grew Osage orange fences across hundreds of miles of raw prairie with zero chemical input. Those plants didn't need feeding because they were plugged into living soil systems that fed them automatically. The fungal web did the work. The bacterial cycle did the work. The undisturbed soil structure held moisture and delivered nutrients on a schedule no fertilizer company can replicate. Every time you till, you sever that network. Every time you apply synthetic feed, you suppress it. Every time you spray, you sterilize it. And then you stand in the garden center buying another bag of something, because the system has made you dependent on the very products that created the deficiency in the first place. That isn't gardening. That is subscription agriculture. And the plants that actually perform across decades, the ones that grow 3, 4, 5 feet a year without intervention, they do it precisely because they form aggressive fungal partnerships. The moment their roots hit undisturbed ground, here is the thing that changed everything I thought I knew about what a fence could really do. I pulled a black locust post out of the ground on a property I was clearing, a post that had been driven into clay soil with no treatment, no concrete collar, no preservative. The owner told me his grandfather said it. That was 1968. The wood was still sound, still hard enough to turn a nail, and the soil clinging to the base of that post was darker, richer, more alive than anything within 10 feet of it. That post had been feeding the earth around it for over 50 years, and I didn't understand how until I split a living root and saw the nodules. Picture a black locust root pulled fresh from the ground. Along its length, you'll find small swellings, pale pink or cream-colored, each one roughly the size of a peppercorn. Crack one open, and the inside is faintly red, almost the color of raw meat. That color is leghemoglobin, a molecule so close to the hemoglobin in your blood that the chemistry is nearly identical, and its job is the same. It carries oxygen, but instead of feeding muscle tissue, it is protecting a bacterial factory operating inside that nodule at pressures and temperatures that would be impossible to replicate in your garage. What lives inside those nodules is a genus of bacteria called rhizobium. The tree offers them sugar, and they offer the tree something in return, something no animal, machine, or garden center product can manufacture cheaply. They crack open molecules of atmospheric nitrogen, the same gas that makes up 78% of every breath you take, and they convert it into ammonium that the roots absorb directly. The tree doesn't need a bag of fertilizer. It is running its own fertilizer plant underground 24 hours a day from the moment it establishes until the moment it dies, and it isn't keeping the surplus, excess nitrogen leaks into the surrounding soil through root turnover, through leaf litter, and the slow decomposition of nodules when old roots die back. Every plant within the root zone of a black locust benefits. The grass grows greener, and the companion shrubs push harder. The soil biology explodes because nitrogen is the bottleneck that limits microbial populations in most temperate ground. This isn't a new discovery. It is a law so old that Roman farmers rotated legumes. through their fields without ever seeing a single bacterium. Frontier. Homesteaders planted black locust along fence lines, not only because the timber outlasted everything else, but because their pastures grew thicker on the fucker downhill side of those rows. They could see the result, passing the knowledge, mouth to mouth for generations. Then bagged ammonium nitrate showed up at the feed store for $12, and within one generation, the entire mechanism was forgotten, not disproven, not replaced by something better, just buried. Under convenience, what you're looking at when you see a living black locust fence is a nitrogen engine wrapped in armor-grade timber, wrapped in a privacy screen that also produces clusters of white flowers, so fragrant and early that pollinators travel considerable distances to reach them. I stopped maintaining my boundary 3 years ago, and it is the single best decision I've made for that piece of ground, not because I gave up, but because I finally understood that the system I planted was never asking me to do anything anyway. Every hour I spent fussing with it, reaching for pruning shears out of guilt. I was actually interrupting a process that worked better without me. Here is what nobody tells you about a hawthorn hedge. You put bare root whips into the ground, 18 inches apart. You water them once if the sky refuses to, and then you walk away. That is the entire input, the entire labor, the entire cost. What happens next is so disproportionate to what you did that it feels like you cheated something. Those stems knit together below the soil line, and the root systems fuse. Mycorrhizal networks thread between them within the first season. And suddenly, you don't have 40 individual plants. You have one organism, stretching across your boundary, sharing water and nutrients, sending chemical warnings when something chews a leaf. A 1,000-year-old hawthorn hedge in the British countryside isn't a row of plants. It is a single networked creature that has been repairing itself since the Norman invasion. No one maintained it. Into that longevity, it maintained itself because density and interconnection are the only maintenance strategy it ever needed. And this is the lever, the part that breaks people's brains when they've spent decades buying fence panels and bags of concrete. The counterintuitive truth is that the less you intervene, the more structural integrity the system builds. Rows of Sharon drops seed into its own gaps, filling its own weak points. You don't patch it, it patches itself and flowers while doing so, feeding pollinators through the late summer months when almost nothing else is blooming. Hawthorn's thorns thicken in response to browsing pressure. An animal pushes against it, and the hedge responds by becoming more impenetrable. A wooden fence takes that same force and cracks. One system absorbs pressure and converts it into defense. The other system breaks and sends you back to the hardware store. I think about the hours I spent mixing concrete around posts that were already rotting from the inside. I think about the money I handed over for timber panels that the wind treated like sails. Then I think about the hawthorn I stuck in the ground one cold March morning with nothing but a spade and a bucket of water. That hedge is now shoulder height. It is dense enough that I can't push my hand through it. Birds nest in it every spring. The soil beneath it is darker and softer than anything else on my property because the leaf litter falls. The fungi break it down and nobody rakes it away. I did one thing, one morning, one action, so small it barely qualifies as labor. And the system has been compounding that single input ever since. Building fertility, building structure, building habitat, asking absolutely nothing of me while neighbors replace panels for the third time. The lever isn't a technique. The lever is the terrifying act of trusting biology to do what it has done for millennia without your supervision. There will come a morning when the shelves are bare, not hypothetically, not in some distant collapse fantasy. I mean a Tuesday in February when the trucks don't arrive, when the produce section holds nothing but wilted lettuce at $9 a head, and every person in that store is staring at the same empty cooler with the same helpless expression. I've seen a version of that morning already, and I watched my neighbors load carts with canned goods and white rice, and whatever their panic could grab, while I walked past them, got in my car, and drove home to a backyard where food was growing itself without my permission. That isn't a gardening story. That is a sovereignty story. And the distance between those two things is everything I'm trying to explain. Your great-grandparents didn't plant hawthorn hedges because they like the berries. In autumn, They planted them because a boundary that feeds you is a boundary. That keeps you alive when the system outside it stops functioning. They planted mulberry along fence lines because a tree that screens your property from the road and drops fruit into your hands every June isn't landscaping. It is infrastructure, the kind of infrastructure that doesn't send you a bill, doesn't require a subscription, doesn't rot after 15 years, and ask you to purchase it again. And here is the part that should unsettle you. The fencing industry, the agricultural supply chain, the grocery logistics network, every one of these systems is designed around the principle that you must keep buying. The timber panel rots, so you replace it. The soil depletes, so you purchase fertilizer. The food travels 1,500 miles in a refrigerated truck, so you pay whatever the price tag demands when it arrives. Every single one of those dependencies is a leash, and every single one of them disappears the moment you plant a living system that compounds instead of decays when the next disruption hits, and it will, because they always do. The people who depend entirely on that chain will panic. They'll crowd stores, and they'll pay whatever is asked. They'll feel in their bodies what it means to have no agency over the most basic human need. And you'll walk into your backyard, pull food from a living boundary you planted years ago, and feel nothing but calm. Not because you're lucky, because you made a choice that your neighbors didn't. You planted something that grows while you sleep, that strengthens while you ignore it, that feeds you without asking anything in return. This was never about gardening. This was never about privacy screens or saving money on fence panels. This is about the only question that matters when systems fail. Can you feed yourself without permission from anyone, plant the hedge, grow the boundary,